papers trembled between her fingers, though the room itself was steady and painfully bright. Across the table, Daniel leaned back in his tailored suit as if he were closing a business deal, not a marriage. His pen tapped once light, almost cheerful before he signed his name with a smile that didn't belong in a moment like this. Outside the high-rise window, Chicago moved on without them cars in the rain, a distant horn, the muted hum of a city that never paused for heartbreak. But Evelyn felt every second stretch, thin and fragile, as if time itself were trying not to hurt her more than it already had. She kept her eyes on the page, not because she wanted to, but because looking up meant facing the truth he was already gone, long before today. And the man who used to hold her at night now couldn't even meet her pain with a flicker of regret. What do you do when the person who once promised you forever walks away smiling? If you've ever had to let go of something you tried so hard to save, this story might feel familiar. Let's begin. The pen trembled between Evelyn Hart's fingers, tapping a faint, uneven rhythm against the divorce papers. Each tap echoed through the polished conference room like a small confession she didn't want to make. She steadied her hand, willing the tremor to stop, but the silence made everything louder, the hum of the air vent, the distant city traffic, the soft rustle of her ex-husband's tailored suit as he shifted in his chair. Daniel Royce sat across from her, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Winter sunlight glared behind him, turning his already sharp features into something harder, cleaner, like he had been carved out of marble for occasions like this. His navy suit fit so perfectly, it looked pressed onto him. He didn't look like a man losing a marriage. He looked like a man closing a deal. "It's straightforward," he said, sliding the final page closer with 2 fingers. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Once you sign, we can file by end of day." She swallowed. Her throat felt tight, painfully dry. She had spent 10 years learning the subtle shifts in his tone. This one meant he was done. The marriage, the arguments, the quiet dinners where they barely spoke, all of it folded neatly into a single task he wanted off his desk. Evelyn forced herself to glance at the papers. Her name stared back at her in firm black print. It felt like looking at a stranger's life. Daniel checked his watch. "I'm meeting with a client at 2, he added. The implication clear, don't make this difficult. A flicker of heat rose in her chest. Anger, shame, something mixed. If he noticed, he gave no sign. The attorney on Daniel's side cleared his throat. The one on hers tried to offer a sympathetic half-smile, but Evelyn couldn't look at either of them for long. The room felt too glossy, too expensive, like she didn't belong in it anymore. Maybe she never had. "Let's finish," Daniel said. She picked up the pen again. Her hand shook harder this time. His eyes followed the movement. "Evelyn," he said gently, though the gentleness felt like condescension. "There's nothing to be upset about. We're both moving on." She hated how easily he said it. Moving on. As if marriage was a location you simply packed a bag and walked away from. Her eyes rose to meet his. For a moment, she searched for something familiar. Regret. Sorrow. A shadow of the man she married. But his expression was flat. Professional. There was even a hint of relief pulling at the corners of his mouth. Was he happy? A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Of course he was. This was his fresh start, his victory lap. The smile forming on his lips told her everything he didn't have the decency to say aloud. She pressed the pen to the paper. Her signature began with a shaky curve, 10 years of shared life condensed into a few looping letters. She paused halfway through, feeling the sting of tears building behind her eyes. No, not here, not in front of him. Daniel's fingers drummed lightly on the table, impatient, eager. That subtle rhythm pushed her forward, as if his tapping hand was nudging her out the door. She tightened her grip. The pen nearly snapped between her fingers as she forced the final line across the page. "There," she whispered. For a heartbeat, her voice sounded unfamiliar, smaller than she remembered. Daniel reached for the papers, scanning them with the brisk efficiency he used for financial reports. "Good," He said, "Really good. Evelyn, I think this is best for both of us." The words landed like a slap. He capped the pen, leaned back in his chair, and the smile fully formed, polished, confident, satisfied. The kind of smile he used at corporate dinners, the one that made him look like a man who always won. He stood first? Of course he did. "Well," he said, straightening his jacket, "take care of yourself." She blinked. That was it. 10 years, and that was his closing line. He nodded once more, as if concluding a meeting, then turned toward the door. His shoes clicked on the marble floor, each step growing lighter as he walked farther from their life together. He didn't look back. Evelyn sat frozen. Her attorney murmured something about next steps filing, documents, timelines, but the words slid past her. Her ears felt full, as though she were underwater. The conference room suddenly felt drafty, the air cold against her arms despite the heavy sweater she wore. She looked down at her signature. It wavered slightly, the ink pooling in one spot where her hand had faltered. That blot of ink felt like a bruise on the page, a mark of something she hadn't meant to reveal. She pressed her fingertips to it, tracing the faint ridges left by the pen. Was this what the end looked like? A quiet room, a too bright window, a man smiling because losing her meant gaining something else. She inhaled slowly. Her chest ached with the effort. The last decade unspooled behind her eyes, the holidays she hosted, the late-night conversations that had grown shorter each year, the mornings she waited for him to take interest in her again. Had all of it meant nothing, or had she simply been convenient until he found a life that fit him better from the hallway? She heard Daniel greeting someone with a laugh, light and easy. He sounded free. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she let the weight of everything press down the humiliation, the confusion, the strange numbness spreading through her limbs. When did love turn into this cold exit she didn't know? But the question lingered, sharp and unanswered, as she stood and gathered her coat with hands that were still trembling, long before the signatures. The cracks were already there, fine, hairline fractures that Evelyn had brushed over with hope and habit. They began so small she barely noticed them, the way you ignore a tiny chip on a drinking glass until one day it shatters in your hand. She remembered waking early one winter morning, the apartment dark except for the glow of the stove clock. Daniel's side of the bed was cold. His tie, a deep burgundy one she'd given him for Christmas, was missing from the hook where he always left it. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the hallway, sharp and out of place at 5:30 a.m. When he walked in an hour later, brushing snow from his coat, he didn't look surprised to see her standing by the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee she'd poured in an attempt to soften the moment. "You're up early," he said, as if that explained everything. "I thought you came home late," she answered. He kissed her cheek, quick and distracted. Late night, early meeting, you know how it goes. But she didn't. Not anymore. His job had swallowed whole chunks of their life, and she had let the emptiness settle between them because she thought it was normal. She had watched couples in their 40s fade into silence and told herself this was just what happened with time. Still, her chest had tightened in a way she didn't want to examine. There were other moments, small ones, sharp ones. The night he'd come home from a corporate retreat, tossing his bag onto the couch, his energy high in a way she hadn't seen in years. She'd asked, "How was it?" "Good," he said, loosening his tie. "You know, talking to everyone made me realize something." "What's that?" He looked at her with that evaluating gaze he sometimes used in meetings. Some people just lose their edge, stop pushing, stop growing. The pause that followed wasn't long, but it was long enough. Ambition matters. Evelyn, in the quiet afterward, she'd smiled, nodding like she understood. Later, lying in bed beside him, she'd stared at the ceiling, wondering when she'd become someone he had to motivate rather than someone he admired. She used to paint. She used to run small weekend art workshops at the community center. She used to dream of opening a gallery someday. But life had shifted, slowly, like sand under her feet. Daniel's hours lengthened. His world expanded. Hers narrowed into tasks she thought would make their life smoother. Grocery lists, birthday plans for his colleagues' wives, a home that looked polished enough to impress the people he brought for dinner. She told herself she didn't mind. Then came the night she almost said something, almost asked him if he still saw her. They were sitting in their favorite restaurant, a place with soft lighting and a booth by the window where they used to linger long after dessert. But that night, Daniel scrolled through emails between bites of salmon, nodding in the right places without really hearing anything she said. Daniel? She'd tried, her voice soft. Do you ever miss us? He didn't look up. Evelyn, please. It's been a long week. Can we not do this right now? She let the question die between them. She didn't ask again. The first real fracture came on a Thursday evening in early spring. She'd been folding laundry on the bed when his phone vibrated against the nightstand. A message lit up the screen. One he clearly hadn't meant to leave face up. Are you still thinking about last night? I can't stop. Evelyn froze, a sweater balled between her hands. Her heartbeat thudded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The room seemed to tilt, the neat lines of the furniture blurring slightly at the edges. She didn't want to pick up the phone. She didn't want to look, but she did. Another message appeared, dinner tomorrow. Same place. Her stomach dropped. The tone was casual, familiar, intimate. Too intimate for someone who wasn't her. She put the phone down slowly, as though setting a fragile object back into place. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the muted TV in the living room, the risotto she'd spent an hour simmering, the wine chilling for the meal she thought they'd share. Her first thought wasn't rage. It was shame. What had she done wrong? Had she made life too easy, too predictable? Had she let herself fade while he kept climbing? When Daniel walked through the door half an hour later, whistling lightly, shrugging out of his coat, she felt something inside her pull tight and painful. He kissed her cheek like always. He complimented the smell of dinner. He talked about his day. She watched him with a kind of stunned clarity, as if she were seeing him through glass. He hadn't even bothered to hide it this time. That was what stung most. Not the betrayal, but the carelessness. During dinner, she nodded when he spoke, smiled when appropriate, laughed even. She felt like a woman playing herself in a scene, and Daniel didn't notice a thing. Later that night, when he showered, she stood in the doorway, listening to the water running, wondering if she should confront him, demand truth, or pack a bag. But she did none of those things. Instead, she crawled into bed, lying stiff and quiet, staring at the shadow of his suit jacket on the chair, its clean lines a reminder of a life she no longer fit into. Why didn't she leave then? The question hovered at the edge of her thoughts, heavy and unresolved, as if it had been waiting years for her to finally ask it. The first time Evelyn saw the girl, she didn't know she was losing her marriage. She only noticed the brightness how the young woman's laughter spilled down the hallway as Daniel guided her into the restaurant. Evelyn had arrived early, choosing a booth in the corner where she could see the entrance, hoping for a quiet dinner. Instead, she watched him walk in with a woman who couldn't have been more than 26, her hair glossy under the pendant lights, her steps light and confident in a way Evelyn remembered from another lifetime. Daniel spotted Evelyn, raised a hand, and motioned the young woman forward with the same warmth he used to reserve for her. "Ev," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. His lips barely brushed her skin. "This is Tessa. She's been helping me on the Limestone account. Brilliant mind. Reminds me of when we were first starting out." Tessa smiled, flawless and enthusiastic, and extended a hand across the table. "I've heard so much about you. Daniel said you have the most organized home he's ever seen." Evelyn shook her hand, the compliment landing oddly. Organized home, not generous, not kind, not smart, a keeper of spaces, not a partner. They sat, and Evelyn listened to the two of them talk, mostly Daniel, animated in a way he wasn't with her anymore. He asked Tessa's opinions, laughed at her jokes, praised her drive. When Evelyn offered something to the conversation, the girl nodded politely, eyes already drifting back to Daniel, as if he were the sun and Evelyn just another bit of clutter orbiting him. The dinner ended with Daniel offering to walk Tessa to her car. Evelyn watched them through the window, the slight lean of their heads toward each other, the way Daniel placed a hand at the small of her back, a gesture he once told Evelyn felt too intimate for public places. That night, she folded herself into bed alone, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Daniel eventually returned, smelling faintly of peppermint and the outside cold. He slid into bed without a word. She kept her back to him, eyes open, drawn to the whisper of headlights brushing the ceiling. Betrayal didn't arrive like thunder. It crept in like this quiet, slow, disguised as nothing. The changes came quickly after. He began dropping remarks that felt like little pinpricks to her confidence. You know, Ev, you could try something new. A course, a job, anything really. Something productive. Or, Tessa reminds me how ambitious we used to be. It's refreshing. Used to be past tense. As though Evelyn had been left behind, gathering dust somewhere he no longer looked. Some nights he came home late, tie undone, hair slightly disheveled. Other nights he didn't come home at all, leaving a text that felt more like a memo. Busy with work. Don't wait up. The lie was thin. She felt it every time she reached across the bed and touched empty sheets. The room felt colder without him, but it wasn't a temperature she could fix. One evening, as Evelyn prepared a simple dinner, roasted chicken, his favorite Daniel walked into the kitchen with that precise calm he used in negotiations. "We need to talk," he said. She turned, drying her hands on a towel. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "This isn't working anymore." Her throat tightened. "What isn't us?" His tone was measured, almost bored. "We're on different trajectories. You've settled, Ev. There's no spark, no evolution." He waved a hand vaguely, like she was an outdated appliance he no longer knew how to use. "I've been carrying this marriage for years," he continued. "And honestly, I don't see the point of pretending. I want a divorce. It's better to do it cleanly before the end of the quarter." She blinked. The phrasing hit her like physical pain. Before the end of the quarter? Her life reduced to a business deadline. "Is this about her?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't flinch. "Don't be dramatic." Her stomach twisted at the cold certainty in his voice. Not denial, not regret, just an irritation that she'd even asked. "You're not the woman I married," he said. "Life is about moving forward, and you haven't." Evelyn held the edge of the counter to steady herself. For a moment she thought she might fall. She tried to breathe, but her chest felt tight, as if something inside her had cracked open and the world had poured in too fast. He walked away before she could speak, his footsteps steady, decisive. The front door closed with a soft click, too soft for a moment that would split her life in two. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the scent of roasted chicken, by plates she had set for two. She reached up to turn off the oven, her hands trembling just enough that she missed the knob the first time. "How do you walk away from the life you built?" The question hovered in the dim kitchen light as she pressed her palms to the cool countertop and wondered when exactly she'd stopped being someone worth staying for. When the final paper slid across the glass table, something sharp flickered inside Evelyn, small at first, like a match struck against a cold surface. The edge of the document caught the overhead light, a thin reflection running down the page as if marking the exact line where her old life ended. Daniel pushed the pen toward her. "You'll feel better once this is done," he said, the words coded in a condescending calm that tightened something behind her ribs. "You can finally focus on yourself, find a hobby, maybe go back to school, keep busy." The pen rested between them, its silver barrel immaculate, untouched by the weight it was about to carry. She stared at it for a moment, her hand hovering as if she weren't sure it belonged to her anymore. A hobby. Go back to school. Keep busy. He said those words the way someone might talk to a widow who needed distraction, as if she were suddenly a woman with too much empty time and no real value. Her fingers curled inward before reaching for the pen. She didn't look up at him, She couldn't, not yet. The heat rising in her chest wasn't humiliation anymore. It was something else, something unfamiliar, something that burned more cleanly. She signed. The line she drew trembled only slightly at the end. Daniel let out a satisfied breath. Good. Really good. I'm glad you understand this is best for both of us. Best for both of us. He said it like they had agreed. Like this was teamwork. Like he hadn't been packing his emotional bags for months while she was still setting the table for two. He shuffled the papers together with polite efficiency. You'll figure things out, he added. Plenty of women reinvent themselves at your age. Your age. As if she were approaching some expiration point he'd been trying to avoid. Her attorney asked a routine question, but the words drifted past her. She was watching Daniel, noticing details she'd trained herself to ignore, the smug ease in his shoulders, the faint satisfaction turning the corners of his mouth upward, the casual arrogance of a man who believed the world would keep smoothing itself under his feet. She used to think she was lucky to be loved by him. Now she wondered if she had ever actually been loved at all. Daniel stood and buttoned his jacket. You'll be okay, he said dismissively. You just need direction, structure. Maybe this will motivate you to grow. The match inside her flared. He didn't notice. He was already checking his watch, already preparing for the next meeting, already living in a future that didn't include her. The attorneys shook hands, exchanged polite goodbyes. Evelyn barely heard them. She reached for her coat, sliding one arm in, then the other. She smoothed the fabric slowly, grounding herself in the familiar weight of it. When she lifted her head, she caught Daniel looking at her with something like impatience, not regret. That was when she felt it fully, unmistakably the ember of something rising in her chest. Not love, not loss, not even grief. It was the beginning of resolve. She straightened her spine, not dramatically, not with any performance, just enough to feel the difference, enough to feel taller inside her own skin. Daniel blinked, surprised at the subtle shift. He opened his mouth as if to offer some final remark, but she stepped past him and reached the door first. The small click of the handle felt like a declaration. She didn't look back. The hallway was wide and bright, sunlight spilling across the tiled floor like a path she hadn't noticed until now. Her steps were slow at first, careful, as though she were walking on legs that had forgotten how to belong to her. But they steadied. Each step felt like a quiet reclaiming. She passed a line of framed photographs, partners, founders, executives, men in suits, women in tailored dresses, people who looked composed and certain. For a moment she imagined her reflection among them, pale and quiet, a woman who had been dismissed like an administrative formality. But she wasn't that woman anymore. Or, rather, maybe she had always been more than that, and she was only just now remembering. When she reached the elevator, Evelyn pressed the button gently, her hand still trembling, but her posture steady. The doors opened with a soft chime. She stepped inside, alone at last. She let out a slow breath she had been holding since the moment Daniel smiled across the table. The breath carried something out of her, some density, some heaviness that had lived in her chest for years. As the elevator descended, her reflection in the mirrored wall met her gaze. Not broken, not defeated, just unfamiliar, like seeing the outline of a woman she couldn't name yet. Chicago's winter light flooded the lobby as she stepped out. The cold air brushed her face, sharp and clean. She pulled her coat tighter around her and paused, eyes closing for a brief second. Who was she without him? The question rose not as fear, but as possibility fragile, unresolved, waiting. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and emptiness, a hollow scent that clung to the air, the way silence clings to a room no one has lived in yet. Evelyn stepped inside slowly, her suitcase rolling across the beige carpet with a soft, dragging sound. The place was small, a one-bedroom rental on Chicago's west side, the kind of apartment people chose when they were in transition, when the future felt blurry and the past was too heavy to carry any farther. She set her keys on the kitchen counter. The clang echoed louder than she expected. The realtor had called the space neutral, a blank canvas for a fresh start. But the beige walls, beige carpet, beige curtains, it all felt like a waiting room, suspended between one life and the next. A life paused, a life unclaimed. She walked from room to room, her footsteps whispering on the carpet. The bedroom held a metal bed frame she'd ordered online and assembled alone at midnight the night before. The mattress was firm, untouched except for the corner where she'd sat that morning, trying to navigate her new silence. In the living room, a single lamp cast a soft pool of light across the floor. Beside it stood one chair, just one, because she could no longer bring herself to imagine setting a second one. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She lowered herself into the chair, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren drifting through the window, the way the building settled like an old creature shifting in its sleep. Everything here was unfamiliar, but it was the quiet that felt foreign the most. She had never noticed how loud her marriage had been, Daniel's typing late into the night, his phone buzzing through dinner, the clipped tone of his voice when he was frustrated, the silence between them thick enough to make breathing feel like an intrusion. Now, in this small apartment, the absence of him felt strangely weightless. Not like freedom yet, more like floating. She unzipped her suitcase, unpacking slowly, a few sweaters, a pair of jeans, 2 framed photos, though she wasn't sure why she'd brought them. One was from her sister's wedding. Evelyn caught laughing mid-moment, sunlight warming her hair. The other was from years ago, the early days with Daniel, back when he still reached for her hand without thinking. She placed them face down on the dresser. By late afternoon, she sat at her new kitchen table, a small, wobbly thing she'd found at a thrift store, staring at the open laptop in front of her. The glow of the screen made her look tired, older than her 39 years. She pulled up job listings, scrolling through them with a determined focus. She didn't quite feel. Administrative assistant, minimum 3 years of recent experience. Gallery coordinator, degree preferred, current portfolio required. Customer service, fast-paced environment, multitasking, a must. She clicked through each listing, her chest tightening a little more with every bullet point she didn't meet. The 10-year gap in her resume yawned like a canyon. She could already hear the unspoken judgments in the hiring manager's eyes. She'd been out of the workforce too long, too old to start over, too inexperienced to jump back in. She sent out 5 applications anyway. Then 7 more, then 12. Hours passed. Evening dimmed the apartment. Streetlights flickered on outside. Her stomach rumbled, but she ignored it. She was waiting, though she wasn't sure for what. A break, a sign, a moment that made sense of anything. When the first rejection email arrived, she barely blinked. The second one came 15 minutes later. The third before she'd finished reading the second. By the time the 5th arrived, a polite, "Thank you for your interest." But Evelyn closed the laptop gently, her breath unsteady. It wasn't the job she was grieving. It was the version of herself who used to believe she could do anything if she tried hard enough. The woman who painted for hours on Sundays, who taught art workshops to kids whose hands were always smudged with color, who had wanted a small gallery near the lake one day. Where had that woman gone? She stood and walked to the closet where she'd tucked a large cardboard storage box. She hadn't planned to open it tonight. She wasn't even sure why she'd brought it with her. But something about those rejection emails, their bland certainty, pushed her toward it. She pulled the box out and set it on the bedroom floor. Dust clung to the taped edges. The top flaps resisted for a moment, then gave way. Inside were pieces of a life she hadn't touched in years. A palette, dry paint still crusting the edge. A set of brushes, stiff with time. A folder of sketches, her sketches charcoal lines capturing faces she once knew. Landscapes she once loved. Old notebooks filled with ideas for the gallery she used to dream about. Color samples, branding notes, a list of artists she admired. She ran her fingers along the brushes. The wood felt familiar under her skin, almost warm. She lifted the palette, turning it slowly in the dim light, remembering the weight of it in her hand, the way colors used to blend into stories beneath her fingertips. Her throat tightened. She had left all of this behind without even realizing the door had closed. Kneeling on the carpet, she sifted through the box, pulling out pieces of herself. She had forgotten pieces that didn't belong to Daniel, didn't tie her to him, didn't answer to the life he built without her. The apartment was silent, but her heart wasn't. Something inside her stirred not loudly, not bravely, but undeniably. What else had she given up? What else had she lost in the years of being small so he could feel big? The question hovered in the dim room, as gentle and relentless as a tide beginning to turn. What did she leave behind when she married Daniel? At the bottom of the box was a face Evelyn hadn't let herself remember in 15 years. The corner of the photograph peeked out beneath a stack of old sketchbooks, an edge she almost mistook for scrap paper until her fingers brushed the glossy surface. She froze. Something inside her stilled with a sudden, aching clarity. She lifted the photograph carefully, as though it might crumble from the weight of the years. The image came into view slowly, like a memory emerging through fog, a young man leaning against the railing of a campus footbridge, autumn leaves swirling behind him. His smile was lopsided, almost shy, and his eyes warm. Curious looked straight into the lens, as if he'd been looking directly at her all along. Caleb Mercer. The name dropped into her chest like a stone into still water, sending ripples through places she thought had gone numb. She lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, holding the photo with both hands. The beige room around her faded until all she saw, all she felt, was the soft pull of another lifetime. She hadn't meant to fall for him back then. He was the kind of person who felt everything deeply art, music, injustice, the way rain sounded on old roofs. Their conversations had stretched late into the night, often ending with Caleb sketching something on scrap paper while she laughed at the intensity he poured into everything. She remembered the afternoon they'd met at the Art Institute, both reaching for the same exhibition ticket at a student counter. He'd joked that it was fate. She'd rolled her eyes, but they ended up walking the exhibit together anyway, discussing light, composition, the way certain paintings made them feel seen. She found that ticket now, nestled in the box like a pressed flower. The print was faded, but her handwriting on the back was still clear. For the day everything changed. She swallowed hard. There were notes scattered beneath it, scribbles in Caleb's looping handwriting, ideas about color theory, quotes he wanted her to read, small sketches he'd made for her between classes. She lifted a page filled with messy charcoal strokes capturing her face in half shadow. She remembered sitting for that sketch, sitting too long because neither of them wanted the moment to end. What surprised her was not the memory, but how quickly the ache bloomed inside her chest, an old ache, deep and familiar, as if someone had knocked gently against a door she had boarded shut. At the bottom of the box lay a bundle of letters tied with worn twine. She knew exactly what they were before she touched them. She had tied that twine herself the week she packed up her college things, sealing off a chapter she hadn't been ready to lose. Her hands trembled slightly as she loosened the knot. The letters spilled into her lap, postmarked envelopes with smudged ink. Corners softened from time. She lifted the first one, sliding out the folded paper. His handwriting rushed back to her in a way that made her exhale sharply, as though she'd been holding her breath for years. Ev, you make the world feel larger, and I need you to know that before anything else. Another letter. I didn't think someone like you could ever choose someone like me, but you did, and I'm trying to be worthy of that. Another I saw you painting in the studio today. The way you see color, it changes something in me. Stay exactly who you are. She closed her eyes, letting the words rest against her skin. She had forgotten he used to write to her like that, open, unguarded, in a way no one had since. The flashbacks came gently, like ripples. Caleb pulling her under his coat on a windy walk. Their hands stained with charcoal after a long night in the studio. The way he listened when she spoke, as if her thoughts mattered more than his own. Their relationship had been passionate, yes, but it was the tenderness she remembered most, the way they grew together. Two young artists imagining a life far larger than the one she had eventually chosen. Then his disappearance. It had been sudden, without explanation. The week before graduation, he stopped answering calls. His apartment was empty except for a few scattered belongings. The studio director said he'd withdrawn from the showcase. Friends whispered about a family emergency. She didn't know what to believe. A few days later, a letter arrived. Her fingers hovered over it now. The envelope slightly creased, the flap worn thin from being opened too many times. She hesitated only a second before sliding the note out. His final letter was shorter than the rest. Ev, I'm sorry. Things happened too fast. I can't explain now. You deserve someone who can stay. Don't wait for me. See? The last line felt just as sharp now as it had all those years ago. Don't wait for me. She had read those words sitting on her dorm room floor. Her knees pulled to her chest, tears falling onto the paper until the ink blurred. She remembered the cold, hollow ache that settled in her bones. A silence so deep it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. She didn't wait, or at least, that's what she told herself. She graduated, found work, built a life, met Daniel, married him, gave up painting, gave up the gallery dream, gave up pieces of herself until she no longer recognized what she had walked away from. Had she ever truly stopped mourning Caleb, or had she simply buried him so deeply that she mistook numbness for healing? She traced the final line of the letter with her thumb. The paper was fragile, almost translucent in places. Had he thought of her again? Had he wondered about the life she ended up choosing? Had he ever regretted disappearing? The questions rose quiet and trembling, like ghosts stirring in the room around her. She wasn't sure she wanted the answers, but she felt the shift soft, inevitable of a door opening inside her. On a gray Monday morning, Evelyn chose something she hadn't chosen in years herself. She stood in front of her closet, staring at the few shirts she owned, her breath fogging slightly against the cool morning air drifting through the cracked window. Chicago's sky was heavy, a pale sheet of clouds pressing low over the west side. But she felt something lighter under her ribs, an unfamiliar tug, like the start of a new beginning trying to find its voice. She picked a navy blouse, simple but elegant, and smoothed the fabric with both hands. The act felt ceremonial, as though dressing for a version of herself she hadn't met yet. She slipped on a pair of modest black flats, tied her hair back, and took one last look at the mirror. The woman reflected there looked unsure, older than she remembered, but there was a steadiness in her eyes that hadn't existed weeks ago. She grabbed her tote bag and left the apartment before she could talk herself out of it. The gallery was tucked between a small coffee shop and a bookstore downtown, its brick facade softened by ivy climbing up one side. The windows displayed a rotating selection of contemporary pieces today, an abstract painting of bold copper and deep emerald strokes, slashed diagonally across a muted background. It was the kind of piece that demanded attention, even from people who didn't understand it. Evelyn paused outside the door, her fingertips brushing the cool glass. She felt suddenly small again, like the 19-year-old who used to dream of belonging to spaces like this. Her stomach tightened. "You're here," she whispered under her breath. "So, walk in." She pushed the door open. A small bell chimed overhead. The scent of wood polish and watercolor paper filled the room, grounding her instantly. Track lights cast warm pools of illumination across canvases arranged with careful intentionality. The quiet inside wasn't empty. It felt curated, like a sanctuary of color and breath. Behind the front counter stood a woman with silver hair pulled into a low bun, her glasses resting near the tip of her nose. She looked up slowly, eyes sharp despite the softness of her age. "Yes," the woman said. "Hi." Evelyn steadied her voice. "I'm here about the gallery assistant position. I sent a resume yesterday." The woman blinked, unimpressed. "You and 50 others." She gestured to a stack of printed applications, all clipped neatly together. People love art until they realize it pays like vegetables. Evelyn managed a small smile. "I understand." The woman's gaze swept over her, her clothes, her posture, the slight tremble in her hands. Name, Evelyn Hart. The curator flipped through a few pages until she found the application. 10-year gap. She looked up. That's usually a no. The words stung, but Evelyn kept her shoulders squared. I know. I stepped away from the art world for a long time. Why? The question was sharp, cutting through any rehearsed answer. Evelyn hesitated. How did she explain a decade of becoming smaller? How did she share the truth without falling apart in front of a stranger? Life took a different direction, she said finally. But I never stopped loving art, and I'd like to find my way back. The curator considered her with a long, unreadable stare. Show me, the woman said. Evelyn blinked. Show you? The curator pointed toward the copper and emerald abstract piece near the window. That painting? Tell me what you see. Evelyn stepped closer, heart pounding. The canvas glowed under soft light, colors colliding with a kind of fierce vulnerability. She let herself breathe, let herself feel the way she used to when she wandered museums alone, letting art speak in ways people often didn't. It feels like a rupture, she said softly. The copper is warmth trying to break through something colder, maybe grief, maybe resistance, but the diagonal cut. She traced the air. It's not violent. It's necessary, like a turning point. Like the moment something finally shifts. The older woman didn't respond. Evelyn continued, voice more certain now. It's not meant to be pretty. It's meant to be honest. And the artist isn't trying to fix the break, she's trying to honor it. Silence settled between them. The curator stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Do you know who painted that? Evelyn shook her head. I did, the woman said. Heat flushed Evelyn's cheeks. I didn't mean to assume, no. A small smile tugged at the corner of the woman's mouth. You saw it exactly the way I hoped someone would. The breath caught in Evelyn's throat. The woman extended her hand. I'm Miriam Cole. Evelyn shook it carefully. The grip firm, grounding. Miriam studied her a moment longer. You're rusty, and you look like life's taken a few swings at you. Evelyn huffed a quiet laugh. That's accurate, but you see clearly, Miriam said. Most people look at that piece and pretend to understand because they want to sound clever. You didn't perform. She folded her arms. We could use someone like that. The words settled over Evelyn like warm light. Does that mean you're hired? Miriam said simply. Part-time to start. If you show up on time and don't faint when someone asks you to lift a crate, we'll talk more. Evelyn stared at her, stunned. Thank you. Thank you. Miriam waved her off. Don't thank me yet. Galleries run on chaos, and artists are worse than toddlers. Start tomorrow at 9. As Evelyn walked out of the gallery, the cold morning air felt different, brighter somehow, threaded with possibility. She paused on the sidewalk, letting the gray sky press down gently instead of oppressively. Her breath came out slow, steady. For the first time since leaving Daniel's office, she felt something expand inside her. Not confidence exactly, but a small, growing warmth. What would stepping back into art awaken inside her? The question lingered as she walked toward her bus stop, her steps lighter than they had been in years. The email looked ordinary until Evelyn reached the bottom, until her eyes stopped on a name she hadn't seen since she was 24. She froze in the dim back office of the gallery, the hum of the old radiator filling the silence around her. The message was just a sponsorship confirmation, a routine note Miriam had asked her to check. But there it was, in clean black type. Caleb Mercer, CEO, Mercer Industries. Her breath snagged. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls had shifted an inch closer. She read the name again, slower this time, tracing each letter as though she needed proof it hadn't been imagined. It was the same crisp serif font his handwritten letters used to echo in her mind. Mercer. She whispered it without meaning to, and the sound of it stirred something deep, something she had folded away so deliberately She thought it had dissolved years ago. The door creaked open behind her. "You vanished," Miriam said, setting a stack of artist portfolios on the table. "Emails scare you." Evelyn straightened too quickly. "No, sorry. It's fine. Just a lot of numbers." Miriam gave her a look, sharp enough to cut through excuses, but she didn't press. "We'll need you front and center on this sponsorship," she said. "Mercer Industries is covering the entire winter exhibit and a good chunk of the renovations. They're particular, organized. They want one liaison only. I told them that would be you. Me." The word came out thinner than she intended. "You're calm," Miriam said, "reliable. And you don't panic when things get strange. Trust me, that's rare. Calm." Evelyn swallowed hard. She wasn't sure she'd ever felt less calm in her life. After Miriam left, Evelyn stared at the email again, the cursor blinking like a steady heartbeat at the end of the text. Caleb Mercer. The last time she'd seen his name, it had been scribbled on the back of a postcard. Zurich. A confession she had read too many times, then not enough, then finally buried under the weight of a life she built with someone else. She closed her eyes. The gallery around her faded into the memory of a college library, dust motes floating in sunbeams. His laughter low and warm as he leaned over a book to point something out. He had smelled faintly of cedar and paint thinner from the studio. They were so young they believed time couldn't touch them. She felt that old ache push against her ribs. Not quite pain, not quite longing, just something tender and unresolved. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her back. Another email, updated event notes from Mercer Industries. She clicked it with a hand that wasn't steady. At the top was a short logistical summary, expected attendance, dietary restrictions, security requirements. But when she scrolled down, she saw it again. "Mr. Caleb Mercer will be present for the full private gala." The words hit harder than she expected. Not some representative, not a deputy, him. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The last time she'd spoken to him, he'd told her not to wait. The last time she'd seen him, he was walking across the quad with his overnight bag, promising he'd be back in a few days. She remembered how his shoulders had looked tense, determined, already burdened by something he wouldn't tell her. She had waited anyway. Weeks at first, then months. And then she'd stopped waiting, or told herself she had. She pushed her chair back and stood, needing movement. The narrow corridor behind the office carried the faint scent of oil paint from the storage closet. The gallery itself was quiet this time of day, the kind of quiet that felt like being inside a held breath. She walked toward the main room, trying to ground herself in the familiar. White walls, soft pools of light, a sculpture near the center of the floor, all tangled steel and delicate glass, glowing like a captured storm. She let her fingers brush the cool air near it, imagining for a moment that the solidity of the metal could steady her own trembling. "He's just a person," she whispered, "just a name." But it wasn't true, not for her. A rustle of fabric made her turn. Miriam stepped into the gallery, carrying a clipboard. Her gaze flicked to Evelyn's face. "You look like you saw a ghost." Evelyn forced a small breath. "Just overwhelmed. It's a big sponsor." Miriam gave a curt nod. "It'll put us on the map. And don't worry, people like Mercer appreciate professionalism, not theatrics." She paused, tapping her pen against the board. "You can handle this." Then she left as quickly as she came. Evelyn wished she felt as sure as Miriam did. The rest of the afternoon blurred into a haze of planning, contacting vendors, updating spreadsheets, reviewing catering guidelines. She tried to drown her thoughts and tasks, but his name threaded through everything she touched, tugging at her attention like a persistent memory. Near closing, she sat alone at the reception desk, surrounded by the soft tick of the front clock. Outside, dusk had begun to settle, the city turning from gray to a muted lavender. She watched cars ease down the street, their headlights reflecting faintly off the gallery windows. What would she do when she saw him? The question rose uninvited, warm and unwelcome in her chest. She tried to imagine the moment. Would he look the same, Would he recognize her? Would he pretend not to? 15 years was a long time. Lives reshaped themselves. People hardened or softened or simply drifted into versions of themselves they didn't expect. A sudden thought struck her, sharp and startling. What if she didn't recognize him? The idea unsettled her more than anything, because if she didn't, then the version of him she'd kept tucked away in her memory, full of warmth and promise, had never truly existed outside the confines of her past. She closed her eyes, pressing a palm lightly against her chest. She felt the faint hum of anxiety under her skin, but beneath it was something else, too. Something fragile and stubborn. Hope. She hated that she wasn't sure which emotion belonged to which man, the one who left, or the one she became after he did. The bell over the door jingled lightly as someone stepped in. She turned quickly, too quickly, and felt her heart jolt before she even saw the stranger's face. It wasn't him, just a delivery driver dropping off packaging supplies. Still, her pulse took its time settling. After the driver left, Evelyn stood for a long moment in the middle of the gallery, her reflection faint in the large front window. She looked like a woman preparing for something she wasn't sure she had the strength to face. Caleb Mercer would be there, in the same room, breathing the same air. The question that lingered, soft but cutting, was one she wasn't ready to answer. Would he remember her? He walked in like a man used to silence rooms, but he froze when he saw her. The gallery had been humming with the soft murmur of staff preparing for the private gala, voices rising and falling as lighting techs adjusted spotlights. Evelyn stood near the center display, checking name tags for the evening. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh canvas. She heard the front door open, then the quick hush that followed an instinctive shift in energy when someone important stepped into a space. She turned slowly. Caleb stood just inside the doorway, framed by the glow of the winter afternoon. He looked older in a way that wasn't unkind. His once unruly dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples, and his jaw had sharpened, as though the years had chiseled away whatever softness youth had given him. His suit was understated, charcoal wool, tailored like it belonged to a man who didn't need to prove anything. He was saying something to the assistant beside him, something low and measured when his eyes lifted. The moment he saw her, the words died on his lips. His entire body stilled, not subtly, completely. Evelyn felt her heart punch against her ribs. For a second, she couldn't move. The gallery lights reflected off the floor, casting soft halos around their feet, as if the room had narrowed to just the two of them. His team noticed his halt. A few exchanged glances. One woman in a navy blazer looked from him to Evelyn as though trying to read the space between them. Evelyn swallowed, her fingers curling around the stack of name tags. She could feel the edges biting into her palm, but she didn't loosen her grip. Her breaths came shallow, as if her body hadn't caught up to the shock of seeing him real. Not a memory, not a letter, not a photograph hidden in an old box. Just him. Caleb took a step forward, then another. Slow, as though he was walking into something precious and terrifying at the same time. Mr. Mercer, his assistant, prompted behind him, confused by his sudden silence. He didn't answer. His eyes didn't leave Evelyn. Up close, she could see the faint lines around them, evidence of years she knew nothing about. Time had changed him, sculpted him, but the intensity in his gaze was the same focus, the same warmth under the surface, the same quiet way he used to look at her during late-night study sessions, as if he saw a different version of the world when she was near. He stopped a few feet away. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Evelyn. He breathed, soft, disbelieving, almost reverent. Her knees weakened. She fought the urge to step back, to run, to protect whatever fragile balance she'd finally built after years of burying him. His assistant blinked in surprise. "You two know each other?" Evelyn opened her mouth, but nothing rose to the surface. She wasn't ready to claim anything, not a past she had spent so long convincing herself meant less than it had. Caleb answered without looking away from her. Yes. The word was quiet, but steady. We knew each other a long time ago. Knew, past tense. It should have settled something inside her. It didn't. The gallery seemed to fold into silence. Even the distant hum of the heater felt subdued. Caleb's eyes flickered over her face, as if checking whether she was real or just a trick of memory. She could see something flicker in them: regret, maybe, or longing, or grief. She couldn't name it, only feel its weight. "Mr. Mercer," Miriam called from across the room, stepping out of her office with brisk steps. "Welcome. We're honored to have your support." He didn't look away from Evelyn until the last possible second, until politeness forced him to. When he finally turned toward Miriam, his voice was composed, back to that calm authority she imagined he carried in boardrooms. But every few sentences, his gaze drifted back, quick glances, but full of questions. Evelyn stayed still, not trusting herself to join the conversation. Her pulse hadn't found its rhythm. She felt the heat of his recognition like a hand pressed over her heart. When Miriam finished the formalities, she gestured to Evelyn. "This is our liaison for the event. She'll be handling your team's needs." Caleb's breath caught barely, but she saw it. Then he extended a hand, professional, polished, but his eyes were anything but. She hesitated before taking it. His palm was warm, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. The touch was brief, no longer than a polite greeting, but something flared behind his expression. A memory, a decade, a question. "It's good to see you," he said quietly. She swallowed. "It's been a long time." "Too long," he replied before he could stop himself. His assistant shifted awkwardly. Miriam raised an eyebrow. Evelyn felt heat gather at her collarbone, not from embarrassment, but from the unmistakable truth in his voice, truth that felt dangerous. Caleb cleared his throat and stepped back, slipping into stoicism again. He discussed logistics with his team, crisp and efficient, but Evelyn could feel the thread between them tightening each time his gaze brushed hers. At one point, he paused mid-sentence when their eyes met across the room. Just for a moment, but enough. He remembered her, instantly, fully, not with the distant recognition of an old acquaintance, but with the weight of someone who had stored the memory away somewhere private. As the meeting wound down, he lingered near the exit while his team filed out. He looked as though he wanted to speak again, to close the distance that felt suddenly too large for 15 feet. Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly at her sides. He took a breath, one that seemed to steady him and unsettle her. Why did he look like he'd been waiting for this moment? The last voice she wanted to hear crashed into the gala like a bad memory wearing expensive cologne. Evelyn recognized it before she turned deep, polished, soaked in the same smugness she used to smooth over for years. Daniel's laughter cut through the soft hum of conversation, slicing the air like a blade dipped in old ache. She felt her shoulders stiffen beneath her black dress. A dress, Miriam said, made her look capable, steady, impossible to ignore. Tonight, she suddenly wanted to disappear inside it. He approached from behind, the echo of his shoes confident in a way that made the floor feel colder. The gala lights reflected off a tumbler of bourbon in his hand. When he reached her side, his smile widened, sharp and performative. "Well," he drawled, "if it isn't my ex-wife playing hostess." His voice carried farther than it should have. A few guests glanced over. Evelyn's cheeks warmed, not from shame she'd earned, but from the kind he used to hand her like a gift. She refused to step back. "Not anymore." "Daniel," she said, keeping her voice level. "You're on the sponsor list, minor sponsor," he corrected with a smirk. "Still counts. Thought I'd come see how you're getting along. You know, now that you're independent." The way he said the word felt like a stain spreading across a clean surface. He let his eyes sweep the room, then land back on her with theatrical pity. "Didn't realize they hired people your age for the front-facing roles." He chuckled, swirling the bourbon. "But I suppose standards vary." A few of his companions laughed under their breath. Her stomach twisted, but she held her posture, her chin steady. She reminded herself he didn't own her anymore, not her time, not her future, not her sense of worth. But old habits had a way of grabbing her by the throat. "Is there something you need?" she asked quietly. He stepped closer. Too close. "Just wanted to see how well you're pretending." His voice dipped, sour and intimate. "You always were good at that." Evelyn's breath caught not because of the insult itself, but because of how easily the old hurt tried to rise, like a phantom limb remembering pain. She swallowed it down, firm but trembling. Behind Daniel, a shift of movement caught her eye. Caleb. He had been speaking with a curator across the room, posture relaxed, expression thoughtful. But now his entire attention was fixed on Daniel, on the sharp edges of the exchange he clearly recognized. His brow tightened ever so slightly, and he excused himself without finishing his sentence. He crossed the room with a purpose that sent a ripple through the staff nearby. Daniel noticed the motion too and smirked. Ah, the man of the hour. Must be nice having that kind of money. He turned slightly, angling himself in a way that boxed Evelyn in between them. "Maybe he can give you a job that sticks." She flinched. The old Evelyn, the one who once bent herself small enough to avoid conflict, wanted to retreat. But her spine remained straight. She didn't retreat. Caleb joined them within seconds. "Is everything all right here?" His voice was calm, steady, but carried an authority that silenced the space around them. His gaze went to Evelyn first, not Daniel. Daniel chuckled again. "We're fine. Just greeting my ex-wife. Catching up." He extended a hand, arrogant and loose. "Daniel Royce." Caleb looked at the hand for a beat too long, then he shook it, formal and unflinching. "Caleb Mercer." Daniel's expression flickered at the name, surprise crawling into his features. Mercer meant something in this city. Suddenly he seemed eager to impress. "Ah, the sponsor. Pleasure to meet you. Didn't realize Evelyn worked with your team." Caleb's eyes settled on Evelyn again. "She's a core part of this gallery," he said. "Its stability depends on her." Evelyn felt something warm coil low in her chest, something foreign after years of being spoken about as if she were a burden. The sincerity in Caleb's voice wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was simply true. Daniel scoffed. "Core part. She can barely manage." Caleb stepped slightly forward, cutting the space in a quiet, unarguable way. "Mr. Royce," he said evenly, "I'm going to stop you right there." Daniel blinked. "This is a professional event," Caleb continued, "and I won't allow anyone to be disrespected here, least of all someone who has earned her role every single day." Heat rushed to Evelyn's face, not embarrassment, but a kind of astonished relief she didn't know how to hold. Daniel tried to laugh, but it came out strained. "I wasn't disrespecting anyone." "You're misreading." Caleb didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. He simply turned toward the gallery's security, who had been watching the tension build, and gave a small nod. "Please escort Mr. Royce to the lobby." Daniel's face reddened. "You can't. This is ridiculous." "I'm a sponsor minor," Caleb corrected quietly. Two security staff approached. Daniel stumbled back a step, then tried to regain his composure, straightening his jacket. "Evelyn!" he snapped. "Say something." She held his gaze for one long, steady moment. "There's nothing left to say." She answered, her voice even. Daniel's jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. He let himself be led away, mumbling under his breath, the scent of his cologne fading behind him like the last echo of a life she no longer belonged to. The room exhaled. Caleb turned to her fully now, concern softening the lines of his face. The noise of the gala receded again, becoming a gentle, distant hum. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was a simple question, but the way he said it with a sincerity Daniel had never managed in all their years hit something deep. She felt it settle over her like a warm coat around cold shoulders. She opened her mouth, then paused. The answer tangled somewhere between yes and no, and something much heavier. His eyes searched hers, not pushing, not demanding, just present. And in that presence, she felt a truth unspoken but unmistakable, What truth did Caleb still hold? They sat across from each other again, not as kids, but as two people who had survived life. The small lounge off the gallery's main hall was dimly lit, the kind of warm, amber glow that softened sharp edges. A single floor lamp cast a narrow beam across the coffee table between them, catching the faint shimmer of Caleb's cufflink and the curve of Evelyn's hands folded neatly in her lap. Outside the frosted window, the city shifted through its winter routines, slow traffic, scattered voices, the distant thrum of late-night trains echoing through Chicago's streets. She hadn't meant to sit down with him. Not tonight. Not after everything that had just happened with Daniel. But when Caleb quietly asked if she needed a minute away from the noise, she nodded before she realized she'd done it. Now they sat in the stillness, a fragile peace resting between them. For a long while, neither spoke. Caleb leaned forward, his elbows resting lightly on his knees, fingers laced. His eyes held the same depth she remembered, dark but not brooding, expressive without trying. He looked older, tired in places he hadn't been before, but grounded, as if the storms he'd weathered had carved something steady into him. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally. Her breath tightened. She hadn't expected him to go there so quickly, though the room itself felt designed for honesty, quiet, contained, free of witnesses. "Caleb," she began, but her voice wavered. "It's been 15 years. I know." His eyes didn't leave hers, and I've replayed them more times than you'd think. The confession landed softly, but its weight spread through her like warmth she didn't trust. He drew a slow breath. "When I left school, it wasn't supposed to be permanent." She watched him carefully. She remembered the day he walked away as if it had been carved into her ribs. "My father collapsed the night before," he said. "Heart failure. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how to process it. All I knew was I had to get home." Evelyn's fingers curled slightly. He hadn't told her anything. Not then. His business was in shambles. Caleb continued. Debt I didn't know existed. Deals that were failing. It was chaos. Every day felt like trying to build a wall while it was already crumbling. He paused, swallowing. I was 22. I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that someone had to keep our family from falling apart. The quiet honesty in his voice pierced something inside her, something that had stiffened for years, hardened by confusion and unanswered letters. She exhaled slowly. "You disappeared?" He nodded. "Yes. And that's on me." His gaze dropped to the table for a moment. "I thought, if I told you everything, I'd pull you into a mess you didn't deserve. You were so bright. Evelyn. So full of hope. I didn't want to be the reason any of that dimmed." She felt a small, unexpected ache at that. The younger version of herself would have begged for this explanation. The older version wasn't sure what to do with it. "So, you cut me out," she whispered. "I tried not to." His voice thickened, but every day stretched into the next, and the longer I stayed gone, the harder it became to reach back. I told myself it was mercy, that you'd move on. Her throat tightened. I waited. I know. His eyes lifted again, full of regret so raw she almost looked away. "And I'm sorry for every day you did." The clock on the wall ticked in the background, steady and patient. "I rebuilt things," he said, slowly, painfully. "I worked jobs I hated. I slept in my car some nights. I took over the company in pieces. And when things finally stabilized, I went looking for you." She blinked. The words felt unreal. "You did." He nodded. "You weren't at your old address. You weren't in any of the student groups anymore. Then I found out through a mutual friend that you'd married." His jaw tightened, gently, as though bracing himself. I took that as my answer. A faint pulse of bitterness rose inside her, not toward him, but toward the version of her past that had drifted just out of reach for so long. "I wasn't happy," she said before she could stop herself. He looked at her with quiet understanding. "I can see that now." She shifted in her seat, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his voice. She hadn't expected this. Not so fully, not so quickly. And somehow, that frightened her more than all the unanswered questions. "You should have told me," she murmured, "even if it was messy, even if it wasn't what you wanted to say." "You're right." His voice cracked slightly. "And I regret that more than anything." The room felt warmer suddenly, smaller, as though the past had pressed itself into the present and asked to be acknowledged. Caleb leaned back, exhaling slowly. His next words were almost a whisper. "I never forgot you." Evelyn froze. He didn't look away, didn't soften the truth or hide from it. "You were the one thing in my life that made sense back then," he said. "Losing you wasn't a choice, it was a consequence. And one I've carried longer than you know." Her breath trembled. The words cut through her carefully built restraint, tugging at everything she'd packed tightly to survive the last decade. She wanted to believe him. She also wanted to protect whatever fragile stability she'd rebuilt. The mix of longing and fear swirled inside her, unsteady and potent. Outside, footsteps passed the door, muffled. The lounge light flickered slightly, the bulb warming and cooling as though mirroring her pulse. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words slipped before she could find them. Could they rebuild something real from what was lost? Starting over at 39 wasn't glamorous, it was gritty, humbling, and the bravest thing she ever did. Most mornings that winter, Evelyn arrived at the gallery before sunrise. The streets outside were still dark, and the windows fogged gently from the warmth inside, meeting the cold Chicago air. She would stand there for a moment, keys in hand, watching her reflection blur into the faint silhouettes of paintings waiting in silence. Something about those moments, those empty, still beginnings, made her feel like her life was turning a quiet corner. She learned quickly, faster than she expected. Inventory logs, artist contracts, donor protocols, lighting adjustments, press coordination tasks. She thought she'd have to catch up to reveal themselves as perfectly within reach. It turned out she hadn't lost her sharpness over the years. She had simply stopped being asked to use it. Soon, Miriam left more responsibilities on her desk. Real ones. Ones that required trust. "Take the lead on the spring exhibit proposal," she said one morning, sliding a folder across the table. Evelyn blinked. "Me, yes. You," Miriam insisted, as though the answer were obvious. "You have an eye for what moves people. Use it." No one had said anything like that to her in years. She stayed late that night, drafting ideas under the soft hum of the overhead lights. When she finally stepped outside, she caught the faintest reflection in the glass door, her shoulders straighter, her gaze more certain. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was pretending. Within weeks, her work began drawing attention. Donors asked for her by name. Artists invited her to preview studios. Even the interns gravitated toward her calm way of navigating tension and small crises. And then, one afternoon in early March, Miriam approached her with a rare smile. "How do you feel about the title Associate Gallery Manager?" Evelyn stood still. The words didn't quite land at first, as though they floated above her, waiting to be acknowledged. "For me," she whispered. "For you," Miriam said. "You earned it." Later that night, the gallery emptied. Evelyn sat alone in the center room, letting the quiet settle over her like a warm blanket. She looked around at the place that had become her anchor, these white walls, these pools of soft light, these sculptures that cast shadows she'd come to recognize like familiar faces. She had built this part of her life with her own hands. No one had carried her here. The thought made her chest swell with something fierce and tender. A few days later, came the news passed along casually through a colleague, then confirmed online. Daniel's company had begun shedding clients, mismanaged accounts, a failed acquisition. His spotless facade had cracked. Evelyn stared at the headline on her phone for a long time, not with satisfaction, not even with vindication, but with a strange, quiet distance. For years she had thought his success defined her failure. Now she understood they had never been connected at all. That night, she walked home through a gentle snowfall, the flakes melting against her cheeks. The city lights blurred softly around her as she kept her hands tucked in her coat pockets. A faint warmth stirred in her, something she almost didn't recognize: freedom. Caleb remained present in her life, not overwhelming, never pushing, always respectful of the space she said she needed. After the gala, they settled into a rhythm: occasional lunches, quiet conversations in the gallery back room, the kind of steady presence that didn't demand anything but made everything feel easier. He admired her work without inflating it. He saw her clearly without trying to rescue her. When he walked into a room, she didn't brace herself. She breathed. One evening, after they had finished setting up a rotating installation, they found themselves alone in the dim gallery. The last rays of daylight filtered through the tall front windows, turning the room a muted gold. Evelyn was adjusting a placard when she felt him step beside her, close enough that she sensed his warmth, but not so close that she felt crowded. "You know," he said softly, "I've watched you these past few months." She froze, half turning. He wasn't looking at her hands or the display, he was looking at her, with a quiet depth that made her pulse stumble. "The way you've rebuilt your life," he continued, piece by piece, without shortcuts, without leaning on anyone. "It's remarkable." A small breath escaped her. "It didn't feel remarkable." "It is," he said gently, "and I admire your strength, Evelyn, not your survival story. You—" The distinction hit her harder than she expected. No one had ever separated the two before. She shifted her gaze toward the sculpture in front of them, a fragile arrangement of glass curves rising upward like a slow breath. Light flickered in its edges. "I don't know if I'm ready." She didn't finish the sentence. It felt too raw, too exposed. Caleb nodded. "Not pushing. You don't have to be ready for anything. You just have to be honest with yourself first." She swallowed. Honesty. The kind she'd spent years avoiding beneath comfort, routine, and fear. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. The gesture alone warmed something deep inside her chest. "You've come a long way," he said, "and you did it without anyone saving you." His voice held no expectation, only truth. She thought of her small beige apartment, the first night she'd spent there, the rejection emails, the storage box, the letters, the way she'd walked into the gallery on that gray Monday morning and chosen herself quietly, without ceremony. Maybe that was why his words reached her now, in a way she couldn't ignore. Because strength wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was built in the quiet, in the daily, in the choices she made when no one was watching. She lifted her gaze to him again. And there, standing in the soft gold light, she felt the question rise in her chest, not spoken, not fully formed, but undeniably alive. Was she ready to love again? The sun had barely risen when she stepped into the garden, the grass still wet from dawn, the air cool enough to make her wrap her arms around herself. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, a soft rhythm along the stone path. When Caleb appeared, the faint gold of morning caught in his hair. She noticed the slightest tremor in his hands, rare for a man who carried boardrooms and negotiations with steady calm. He stopped a few feet from her and let out a small breath, one that fogged in the chilly air. "You came," he said quietly. "I said I would." Her voice was gentle but unsure, as if the morning light might shatter if she spoke too loudly. They were standing in the garden behind his family's estate, a place she hadn't known existed until the evening before, when he'd invited her for a quiet weekend to breathe, as he put it. Even the invitation had made her chest tighten. She hadn't been sure if she was walking towards something or away from something else, but she had come. The garden was wide and soft around them, rows of early spring flowers, bare branches waiting for warmth, the kind of quiet that made every heartbeat feel louder. Caleb's gaze rested on her face, searching but not demanding. "There's something I need to say," he murmured. She swallowed. "Caleb, just let me say it." His voice carried no urgency, only a steady sincerity that made her pulse flutter. He reached into the pocket of his coat, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. He didn't kneel, didn't create spectacle. He simply held a small velvet box between them, like a promise he'd been carrying for years. "I'm not asking to fix your life," he said. "You already did that yourself." Her breath caught. "I'm not asking to erase your past. I'm not asking you to forget it. And I'm not offering protection or rescue." He hesitated, eyes warming, softening. "I'm offering partnership, a life built from who we are now, not who we were." The box stayed closed. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't assuming. "I want you to have choices. Evelyn, I want you to decide your future with a clear heart. If that future includes me, then God. I would be grateful for it. But if it doesn't, I'll still be proud of the woman you've become." She felt her throat tighten, suddenly overwhelmed by the quiet honesty in him. For years she had been spoken to with disappointment, with condescension, with indifference. This steady, grounded love felt almost impossible. "Caleb," she whispered, "I'm not the girl you knew." "I know," he said softly. "You're stronger." Her eyes stung. She turned slightly, looking out over the garden, watching the light slowly spread over the tops of the hedges. She had spent so long believing she'd lost the right to start over. Too old, too bruised, too tired. But the woman who stood here now was not the woman Daniel had dismissed, or the girl Caleb had left behind. She had built a life again. She had rebuilt herself. And maybe, she realized, that was why this moment didn't terrify her. Not the way it once would have. Caleb stepped closer, not touching, just near enough that she felt the warmth of him. "I don't need an answer now," he murmured, but she did. The answer rose in her chest with a clarity that startled her. She turned toward him fully, her breath trembling, her hand lifted to her own chest as if steadying something fragile and new. When she looked up, she saw worry flicker behind his calm exterior, worry that she would say no, that he had misread these moments, this tenderness between them. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. "Yes," she whispered. The word was barely there, almost lost to the morning air. But he heard it. His eyes closed for a heartbeat, as if absorbing the weight of it. And when he opened them again, emotion shone through the steady restraint he carried so often. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, no diamonds, no grandeur, just a small band with a single oval sapphire, the color of the lake near their old college campus, the color of the afternoons they'd spent talking about futures they were too young to understand. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. When he slid the ring onto her finger, her hand trembled enough that he steadied her with his other, not gripping, not claiming, just offering quiet support. When he leaned forward, he didn't kiss her mouth, he pressed a warm, brief kiss to her forehead. The softest gesture of reverence. Something inside her loosened at that, something old and tightly held. When they finally stepped back, neither spoke. The morning around them felt different now, fuller, as if the sun itself had waited for that moment before breaking fully over the garden. Evelyn looked down at the ring, small and gentle against her skin. It didn't feel like ownership. It felt like invitation. She exhaled slowly, a trembling breath of relief and wonder. But beneath the warmth, a quiet question stirred in her, one she wasn't ready to say aloud. What would Daniel do when he saw what he had thrown away? The thought lingered in the cold morning air, sharp enough to catch at the edges of her new joy. The light from Daniel's laptop screen washed over his face, pale and cold in the dimness of his apartment. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual late evening noise traffic, distant sirens, a train rattling past somewhere, but none of it touched him. He sat hunched on the sagging couch, still wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt from the day before, staring at the headline he had read at least a dozen times. Curator Evelyn Hart marries tech founder Caleb Mercer in private ceremony. The words were crisp, elegant. The accompanying photograph was soft, almost unreal Evelyn in a simple ivory dress, her hand resting gently in Caleb's. She wasn't laughing, wasn't posing. She was simply radiant. Radiant in a way Daniel couldn't remember ever seeing when she'd lived beside him. His fingers tightened around the edge of the laptop until the plastic creaked. He blinked hard, as if the image might change if he looked long enough. But it didn't. She was married, she'd moved on, she looked whole. He sat back slowly, the couch springs sighing beneath him. The apartment around him was nearly dark curtains half closed, stacks of unopened mail on the coffee table, clothes draped over a chair he never used. It smelled faintly of stale takeout and something metallic, like old regret. He hadn't meant for life to end up like this, not really. But the fall had been steady, piece by piece, decision by decision. First the job and unexpected restructuring, though he knew deep down it hadn't just been restructuring. Then the girlfriend, young and quick to leave once the money stopped flowing. Then the savings, disappearing into the quiet void of half-hearted attempts to fix what he should have faced years ago. He dragged his hand down his face, exhaustion settling into his bones like winter cold. The laptop screen dimmed for a moment, then brightened again, illuminating his unshaven jaw. The lines around his eyes he hadn't noticed forming. He whispered her name under his breath. It sounded foreign now. Evelyn. There had been a time he remembered it vaguely when she used to wait up for him, leaving a lamp on in the living room. When she used to press a warm mug of tea into his hands after a long day. When her laughter had filled their house the way sunlight fills a kitchen on a good morning. When had he stopped hearing that laugh he tried to remember? But the memories blurred with the years he'd spent chasing promotions, admiration, and people who only cared about the shine he wore on the outside. He had been so convinced he deserved more excitement, more admiration, more everything that he hadn't realized what he already had. He swallowed hard. The laptop's glow stretched across the room, catching the edge of a framed photograph on the bookshelf. He hadn't looked at that picture in years, him and Evelyn on their 5th anniversary, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm loosely draped around her. He stood up, slow and unsteady, and crossed the room. When he lifted the frame, dust shifted across the glass. Their faces stared back, younger, softer. He felt something tighten sharply in his chest. He traced her smile with his thumb, and before he could stop it, a hot sting rose behind his eyes. For years he'd told himself she was holding him back, that she didn't understand ambition, that she made life too small, too quiet. But the truth clear, bitter, unavoidable, hit him like a wave. He had made her small. He had taken her steadiness for granted. He had mistaken her gentleness for lack of drive. He had walked away from someone who had loved him without conditions. And Caleb Mercer of all people saw what he had missed. He sank to the floor, the photograph slipping from his hands and landing face down on the rug. His breath came unevenly now, sharp, unsteady pulls of air. A sound escaped him, low and cracked, almost unfamiliar. He pressed his palms to his eyes, but it didn't stop the tears they slipped through anyway, startling in their warmth. He had never cried over her, not when he first asked for the divorce. Not when he smirked across that glass table, pretending it didn't matter, not when he watched her walk out of his life. But now, staring at what she'd become without him, who she'd become, it was as if the truth finally clawed its way through his pride. He hadn't lost to a billionaire. He had lost to himself, his arrogance, his blindness, his entitlement, his belief that she would always be waiting, always be small enough to stay in his shadow. He leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees, head bowed. For a few minutes, he stayed like that, shoulders shaking in a way he couldn't control. The tears came again, then again, until they soaked the collar of his shirt. The apartment remained silent except for the soft, hollow sound of him finally breaking. When he lifted his head, his vision was blurry, but the laptop screen still glowed across the room. Evelyn's wedding photo shone back at him warm, serene, peaceful. Miles away, she stood in a different kind of light now, surrounded by the people who cherished her, wrapped in a life she had built with both hands. Somewhere, she was probably laughing softly, or stepping into a new room with her fingers laced in Caleb's. She wasn't thinking of him. Not anymore. And the strange thing, the part that cut deepest, was that she didn't need to. She had found her beginning. He was standing in the ruins of his own making, staring at the ending he had chosen years ago without realizing it. For a long moment, he just breathed, a ragged, uneven breath that tasted like truth. The night pressed closer around him, but there was no one left to blame. There was only the cost he had never bothered to count, and somewhere far from him, Evelyn's peace stretched open like a new horizon. Sometimes, healing begins in the quiet moments we once tried to avoid, the nights when the house feels too still, or the mornings when we're not sure who we are without the life we left behind. Those moments don't break us the way we fear they will. They soften us, long enough for truth to finally settle in. One gentle lesson we learn, often later than we'd like, is that love is never meant to shrink us. The right connection doesn't ask us to disappear, to silence our dreams, or to make ourselves small so someone else can shine. Real love, whether it finds us early or finds us again, meets us where we are, with open hands and steady eyes. And maybe the most human truth of all is this: we don't begin again because we're fearless. We begin again because something inside us refuses to stay dim. Because even after heartbreak, there's a part of the heart that still wants to grow, still believes there is more life waiting. If you're standing at the edge of something new, unsure or a little shaken, let this be a quiet reminder. It's never too late to reclaim your light. Thank you for spending a little of your day with this story. It truly means more than you know. Your presence here, your quiet companionship, is a reminder that there are still hearts in this world, willing to listen and feel alongside others. If the story touched you in any way, a gentle like, share, or subscribe helps us keep spreading kindness, understanding, and the kinds of stories that stay with people. Wishing you a warm, peaceful evening and a little light wherever you need it most.